The Arizona desert stretched endlessly before Marcus Webb, a canvas of burnt orange and dusty copper that seemed to swallow the horizon whole. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, turning the air into visible waves of heat that danced above the cracked earth. Marcus adjusted the worn baseball cap on his head, a faded memento from his days in the Marine Corps, and kept walking along the desolate highway that cut through the Sonoran wilderness like a scar. 3 years had passed since he'd returned from deployment. 3 years since the IED that had taken his left leg below the knee and scattered his unit like leaves in a storm. The prosthetic he wore now was functional, government-issued, nothing fancy. It got him from point A to point B, but it couldn't carry him away from the nightmares that still woke him at 3 a.m., drenched in cold sweat, reaching for a rifle that wasn't there. Marcus had been drifting for months now, hitchhiking across the Southwest, taking odd jobs where he could find them, sleeping under overpasses when he couldn't. His therapist at the VA hospital in Phoenix had called it avoidance behavior. Marcus called it survival. Sometimes, keeping moving was the only thing that kept the darkness at bay. The small town of Sentinel Ridge lay somewhere ahead, according to the last trucker who'd given him a ride. Population 847, the man had said, mostly retirees and folks who preferred isolation to civilization. Marcus figured he'd find a diner, maybe pick up some work at a ranch or garage, then move on. That was the pattern. That was the plan. But plans, Marcus had learned, were just suggestions the universe liked to ignore. He heard the whimpering before he saw anything, a sound so faint he almost mistook it for the wind whistling through the scattered Joshua trees. Marcus stopped, his combat instinct still sharp despite years of trying to dull them with distance and silence. He turned slowly, scanning the landscape with eyes trained to spot threats in the chaos of war zones. There, about 50 yards off the highway, partially hidden behind a cluster of red rocks, something moved. Marcus's hand instinctively went to his hip, where he used to carry his sidearm. Nothing there now except empty air and old habits. He took a breath, steadying himself, then carefully made his way off the asphalt and onto the rocky terrain. His prosthetic clicked softly with each step, a rhythmic reminder of what he'd lost and what he'd survived. The whimpering grew louder. As Marcus rounded the rocks, he found the source, a dog, medium-sized, with matted fur that might have been golden once but was now caked with dirt and dried blood. The animal was lying on its side, panting heavily, its ribs visible through its filthy coat. One of its back legs was twisted at an unnatural angle, clearly broken. But what caught Marcus's attention, what made his breath catch in his throat, was the dog's eyes. They were intelligent. Painfully, impossibly intelligent. The dog looked directly at Marcus, and in that gaze, he saw something he recognized, the look of a soldier who'd been left behind, wounded and waiting for death or rescue, whichever came first. "Hey there, buddy," Marcus said softly, crouching down slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "You're in pretty rough shape, aren't you?" The dog's tail gave a weak thump against the ground. Despite its obvious pain, despite being trapped in this godforsaken wasteland, the animal was trying to wag its tail. Trying to trust. Marcus felt something crack inside his chest, something that had been frozen solid for 3 years. He carefully removed his backpack and pulled out his water bottle. Cupping his hand, he poured water into his palm and held it near the dog's muzzle. The animal drank desperately, its pink tongue lapping up every drop. Marcus refilled his palm twice more before the dog finally settled, some of the panic leaving its eyes. Okay, Marcus murmured, assessing the situation with the same tactical mindset he'd used in Helmand Province. "That leg's bad. You've probably been out here for days. How are you even still alive?" As if in answer, the dog lifted its head slightly and looked past Marcus, toward the east, where the desert stretched into a series of low mesas and canyons. The animal made a sound, not quite a bark, not quite a whine, but something insistent. Marcus followed the dog's gaze. At first, he saw nothing unusual. Just more desert, more rocks, more emptiness. But then, as the sun shifted lower in the sky, casting longer shadows across the landscape, he noticed something odd. About a mile away, there was a formation that didn't quite look natural. The shadows fell wrong, creating geometric patterns that nature typically avoided. "What is it, boy? You trying to tell me something?" The dog looked back at Marcus, then toward the formation again. The message was clear. Marcus sat back on his heels, considering his options. The smart thing would be to keep walking, maybe flag down a car on the highway, get to Sentinel Ridge before dark. This wasn't his problem. He'd learned the hard way that getting involved, caring too much, only led to more pain. But as he looked at the dog, at this wounded creature who was somehow still fighting, still trying to communicate, still refusing to give up, Marcus realized he'd already made his decision. Maybe it was because he saw himself in those intelligent eyes. Maybe it was because he'd spent 3 years running away from everything, and he was tired of running. Or maybe it was simply because, for the first time since the explosion that had changed his life, he felt needed. "All right," Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion he thought he'd lost the ability to feel. "Let's get you somewhere safe first, then we'll figure out what you're trying to show me." He shrugged off his flannel shirt, leaving him in just his t-shirt, and carefully arranged it into a makeshift stretcher. The dog whimpered as Marcus gently lifted it onto the fabric, but it didn't snap or struggle. It trusted him. That trust felt heavier than any gear he'd carried in the Marines. Marcus fashioned a sling using his belt and some paracord he kept in his pack, creating a way to carry the dog without putting pressure on its broken leg. It wasn't pretty, but it would work. Improvise, adapt, overcome, some lessons stuck with you forever. With the dog secured against his chest, Marcus started walking toward the strange formation in the distance. Each step sent little jolts through his prosthetic, and the extra weight made his back ache, but he pushed forward. The sun was getting lower, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. He'd need to reach whatever was out there before full dark. As he walked, Marcus talked to the dog in a low, steady voice. He told him about Helmand Province, about the friends he'd lost, about the night the IED had gone off and how he'd woken up in a German hospital, his leg gone and his future uncertain. He talked about the VA hospital, the depression, the anger, the way his girlfriend had left because she couldn't handle who he'd become. He talked about things he'd never told his therapist, never told anyone. The dog listened, its eyes fixed on Marcus's face, as if it understood every word. The strange formation grew closer, and as it did, Marcus's sense of unease grew with it. His combat instincts, dormant for so long, began firing warning signals. This wasn't natural. The closer he got, the more obvious it became. The rocks weren't rocks, they were too uniform, too deliberately placed. And there, partially buried in the sand and brush, were edges that were too straight, corners that were too precise. This was a structure. Ancient, weathered by countless years of desert storms, but definitely constructed by intelligent hands. Or maybe not hands at all. Marcus's heart began to pound as he approached what appeared to be an entrance, a gap in the formation where the rocks had crumbled away, revealing darkness beyond. The dog in his arms tensed, lifting its head, sniffing the air. Then it looked at Marcus again with those impossibly knowing eyes and made a soft sound that Marcus could only interpret as, yes. Here. This is it. The entrance was perhaps 6 feet high and 4 feet wide, the edges worn smooth but still showing faint markings that might have been writing or decoration. It was impossible to tell. The air that wafted from the opening was cooler than the desert heat, carrying a faint metallic scent that reminded Marcus of electrical storms and copper. Every tactical instinct Marcus possessed was screaming at him to turn around, to get back to the highway, to call someone, anyone, with more authority and better equipment than a broke veteran with a broken dog. This was above his pay grade. This was potentially dangerous. This was definitely not something a person should investigate alone. But the dog whimpered softly, insistently, and Marcus felt that crack in his chest widen a little more. "You came from in there, didn't you?" Marcus asked quietly. And you crawled all the way out to the highway, broken leg and all, to find help. To find someone who would, what? Come back with you? The dog's tail managed another weak thump. Marcus pulled out his phone. No signal, of course, they were miles from any cell tower. He had a flashlight in his pack, half a bottle of water, some beef jerky, and a knife he'd carried since his service days. Not exactly an expedition kit for exploring potentially alien structures, but it would have to do. He carefully set the dog down in a shaded area just inside the entrance, making sure it was comfortable. I'm going to take a quick look, he said, as if the dog could understand. Just a reconnaissance. 5 minutes, then we figure out how to get you real medical help, okay? Marcus clicked on his flashlight and stepped deeper into the structure. The passage sloped downward, the walls smooth and curved in ways that seemed organic yet deliberate. The markings he'd seen at the entrance continued along the walls, becoming more elaborate the deeper he went. They seemed to glow faintly in the beam of his flashlight, as if responding to the light or perhaps to his presence. After about 50 feet, the passage opened into a larger chamber. Marcus's flashlight beam swept across the space, and what he saw made him freeze in place, his breath catching in his throat. The chamber was vast, easily the size of a high school gymnasium, and it was filled with technology. Not human technology. The structures and devices that filled the space were too smooth, too seamlessly integrated with each other and the walls. Curved surfaces flowed into angular ones without seams or joints. Lights pulsed softly along conduits that ran like veins through the walls. And in the center of it all was something that looked like a console or control panel, covered in those same glowing symbols. Jesus Christ, Marcus whispered. This wasn't just ruins. This was a functional installation, hidden beneath the Arizona desert, possibly for hundreds or thousands of years. And somehow, that dog had known about it. Had led him here deliberately. Marcus's mind raced through possibilities, each more impossible than the last. Ancient aliens? Secret government facility? Mass hallucination brought on by dehydration and PTSD? None of it made sense, yet here he was, standing in proof that humanity's understanding of history, of reality itself, was fundamentally incomplete. He took a step forward, then another, drawn toward the central console like a moth to flame. As he approached, the lights in the chamber seemed to brighten, responding to his movement. Symbols on the console began to pulse in sequence, creating patterns that reminded Marcus of computer code or mathematical equations. Then he heard the barking. Not the soft whimper of the wounded dog he'd left at the entrance, but urgent, alarmed barking that echoed down the passage. Marcus spun around, his heart hammering, and ran back toward the entrance as fast as his prosthetic would allow. He burst out into the fading daylight to find the dog struggling to stand, dragging its broken leg, barking frantically. But it wasn't looking at Marcus, it was looking up, at the sky. Marcus followed the dog's gaze and felt his blood run cold. There, silhouetted against the sunset, were 3 black helicopters moving in formation, heading directly toward their position. They were still a few miles out, but closing fast. Military, Marcus was certain of it. The matte black paint, the purposeful flight pattern, the fact that they were flying low and fast through restricted airspace, these weren't news choppers or tourist rides. Someone knew about this place. And they knew someone had found it. Marcus's mind kicked into combat mode, analyzing the situation with cold precision. 3 helicopters meant at least a dozen personnel, possibly more. They'd have thermal imaging, night vision, communication equipment, and almost certainly weapons. He had a flashlight, a knife, and a wounded dog. The odds were not in his favor. But something in Marcus rebelled at the thought of just surrendering, of letting whoever was in those helicopters take control of whatever was down in that chamber. The government? A private military contractor? Whoever they were, they'd hidden this place, kept it secret, and Marcus had a strong suspicion that anyone who stumbled across it didn't walk away to tell the tale. He'd seen how governments handled inconvenient witnesses in war zones. He had no illusions about what happened to inconvenient witnesses in the middle of the Arizona desert. The dog was looking at him now, urgently, as if begging him to understand something crucial. And suddenly, Marcus did understand. The dog hadn't just led him here to find the installation. It had led him here because something inside needed to be found, needed to be activated, needed to be used. The dog had been trying to save them both. "Okay," Marcus said, scooping up the dog despite its whimpers of pain. "Okay, I get it. We're going back inside." He ran into the passage, moving as fast as he could with the extra weight in his prosthetic, the dog cradled against his chest. The beam of his flashlight bounced wildly off the walls as he descended back into the chamber. Behind him, growing louder by the second, he could hear the thunder of helicopter rotors. Marcus burst back into the main chamber and approached the central console, his mind racing. How did this work? What was he supposed to do? He had no training for this, no context, no instruction manual for alien technology that had been hidden beneath the desert for who knew how long. The dog barked once, sharply, and Marcus looked down. The animal was staring at the console, then at Marcus, then back at the console. Its meaning was clear: touch it. "This is insane," Marcus muttered. "This is absolutely insane." But he'd already come this far. He'd already made his choice when he'd stopped for a wounded dog in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes you just had to trust your instincts, trust the moment, and deal with the consequences later. Marcus reached out and placed his hand on the console. The reaction was instantaneous and overwhelming. The symbols blazed to life with brilliant light, and Marcus felt a surge of something flow from the console into his hand, up his arm, through his entire body. It wasn't painful, but it was intense, like every nerve ending was suddenly awake and processing information at impossible speeds. Images flooded his mind, vast starships moving through space, worlds he'd never seen, beings that were definitely not human. He saw war, cosmic, devastating war that made human conflicts look like children's squabbles. He saw sacrifice, desperation, and a final stand made by beings who knew they were facing extinction. And he understood. God help him, he suddenly understood. This wasn't just an installation. It was a sanctuary. A vault. A last hope left behind by a species that had fought and lost against something terrible, something that was still out there, still hunting, still hungry. They had left this place, hidden it, and set a guardian to watch over it. A guardian that could adapt, that could survive, that could recognize someone worthy when they finally arrived. The dog, the incredibly intelligent, impossibly knowing dog, wasn't just a dog at all. It was the key. The first test. The proof that whoever found this place had the one quality that mattered most: compassion. The light from the console expanded, filling the entire chamber, and Marcus heard the helicopters arriving above, heard shouting, heard the sound of boots on rock as soldiers prepared to breach the entrance. But it was too late for them to stop what was already in motion. The dog transformed before Marcus's eyes, its body shimmering and shifting, growing larger, its broken leg healing instantly as its true form began to emerge, something beautiful and terrible and utterly alien, yet somehow still familiar in its eyes. And in that moment, as the light reached its crescendo and the first soldiers appeared at the chamber entrance, Marcus Webb, wounded veteran, drifter, lost soul searching for meaning in an indifferent universe, became something more. He became Earth's guardian. He became its last hope. He became the one thing standing between humanity and a threat they didn't even know existed. The installation had been waiting. The guardian had been waiting. And now, finally, they had found each other. The real story was just beginning. The light emanating from the console enveloped Marcus like a living thing, wrapping around him in tendrils of pure energy. Through the blazing illumination, he could see the soldiers at the chamber entrance frozen in place, their weapons raised but useless against the barrier of light that now separated them from him. The being that had been disguised as a wounded dog now stood beside him in its true form. It was roughly humanoid but stood nearly 8 feet tall, with skin that shimmered like oil on water, constantly shifting through colors. But it was the eyes, those same impossibly intelligent eyes, that anchored Marcus's sanity as reality bent around him. "Do not be afraid, Marcus Webb," the being spoke, though its mouth didn't move. The words formed directly in Marcus's mind. "I am Keeper Thane, last guardian of the Viridian Threshold. You have been chosen." "Chosen?" Marcus managed. "I'm nobody. I'm just a broken-down marine." The light pulsed, and suddenly Marcus saw himself through Thane's eyes, the moment he'd stopped for the wounded dog despite having every reason to keep walking. "You stopped," Thane said simply. "You showed compassion when the universe had shown you none. That is the rarest form of strength in all the cosmos." Through the barrier, Marcus could see more soldiers pouring into the chamber. They wore black tactical gear with no identifying marks. One of them, a man with silver hair and a scar down his left cheek, was barking orders into a radio. "Who are they?" Marcus asked. "The Shadow Council," Thane replied, flooding Marcus's consciousness with information. "A human organization that discovered this installation 73 years ago. They've kept it secret, studied it, but failed to unlock its power. The threshold requires a guardian chosen by compassion, not claimed by ambition." "What is this place?" Thane gestured, and the chamber transformed around them. Through the walls, through the earth itself, Marcus could see a gateway, a tear in spacetime leading somewhere impossibly distant. "The Viridians were my people," Thane explained. "We were explorers, peacekeepers. But we opened a door to something we didn't understand. Something came through. Something that consumes entire civilizations. We call it the Devourer." Marcus saw it through Thane's memories, a war spanning star systems, worlds going dark one by one. "We couldn't stop it, but we could slow it down. We built thresholds on worlds across the galaxy. We chose 12 worlds. 8 have fallen. 3 have gone silent. Earth is the last. And I am the last keeper. How long until it reaches Earth?" Thane's colors darkened. 3 months. Perhaps 4. How do we fight something like that? "We don't evacuate," Thane said quietly. "We fight." The barrier flickered. The soldiers had brought in equipment, large cylindrical devices disrupting the energy field. The silver-haired commander stepped forward with a megaphone. "That technology belongs to the United States government. Stand down immediately, or we will use lethal force." Marcus looked at Thane. "What happens if I let them in?" "The Shadow Council will attempt to weaponize the threshold against other humans. Their squabbles will distract from the real threat. The Devourer will come, and Earth will be unprepared. So what do I do? Accept the mantle of Guardian. Bond with the threshold. Your DNA will be rewritten. Your consciousness will expand. You'll become something between human and Viridian. You'll live for centuries and bear knowledge that may break lesser minds. And if I refuse? I collapse the threshold, destroying it to prevent misuse. Earth faces the Devourer alone, unprepared. You have 60 seconds. Marcus thought of his therapist who'd said he was running from responsibility. His ex-girlfriend who'd said he'd lost the ability to care. The friends who'd died in Helmand province. The wounded dog crawling miles through desert to find help. I'm not accepting because I'm special, Marcus said quietly. I'm accepting because you're asking for help. Because refusing would be just another way of running, and I'm done running. Thane's colors shifted to brilliant gold. Spoken like a true guardian. Place both hands on the console. Marcus pressed both hands against the surface, and the universe exploded. Pain and ecstasy merged as energy poured through him. He felt his cells being rewritten, his consciousness expanding. He saw Earth from orbit, saw hidden threshold installations on 5 other continents, saw the Devourer consuming the last survivors of another civilization light-years away. His prosthetic leg tingled and transformed, the metal dissolving, replaced by advanced Viridian biotechnology. Within seconds, he had a new leg that responded as naturally as if he'd been born with it. The threshold heals its guardians, Thane explained. The barrier collapsed. Soldiers poured in, weapons raised. Hands up. Now, the commander shouted. Marcus looked at him with his new vision, seeing so much more: elevated heart rate, micro-expressions of fear, trembling finger on the trigger. Commander, my name is Marcus Webb. I'm a former Marine, and I'm not your enemy. But I can't let you interfere. Marcus raised his hand, and energy barriers materialized between him and the soldiers. They opened fire, but bullets disintegrated harmlessly. I don't have time to convince you slowly. So I'm going to show you quickly. He connected with the minds of everyone in the chamber, showing them what he'd seen. They experienced Thane's memories of the Devourer, saw worlds die, felt the desperate hope that had driven the Viridians. When Marcus withdrew, over a dozen people stood in stunned silence. Several had dropped weapons. The commander had fallen to his knees. "Dear God," he whispered. "It's real." "Yes," Marcus said gently. "And we have 3 months to prepare." The commander looked up with desperate hope. "What do you need?" Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus became the most famous person on Earth. The revelation came in stages: heads of state first, then scientists, then a global announcement from the President of the United States. The reaction was chaotic. Panic, denial, religious fervor, conspiracy theories. Markets crashed. Governments deployed forces to maintain order. But beneath the chaos, something else emerged: unity. Scientists from rival nations collaborated. Military forces that had been enemies began training together. Resources were pooled. Ancient grudges were set aside. Marcus traveled the world, activating the other 5 threshold installations. In the Amazon rainforest. An ice cave in Antarctica. The Gobi Desert. The Mariana Trench. Each housed another keeper who'd waited centuries, disguised as animals, woven into ecosystems, watching and hoping. With each threshold activated, Earth's defensive network grew stronger. Energy shields. Weapons that could fire across dimensions. And Marcus's abilities grew exponentially. He could teleport between sites. Generate energy constructs from thought. Interface with alien technology instinctively. His consciousness could stretch across the globe. But 6 weeks after his transformation, grim news arrived. The Zephyr are gone, Chinese General Zhang Feng reported. Their last colony worlds went silent. That puts the Devourer approximately 8 weeks from Earth. Our defensive preparations? Marcus asked. 63% complete, Russian Colonel Volkov replied. We're behind schedule. Power grid connections are the bottleneck. An alarm suddenly blared, the Threshold's long-range detection system. The Devourer, Thane announced, colors shifting to warning red. It's moving faster. It's detected Earth. ETA, 4 weeks. 4 weeks. Half their timeline gone. Then we work twice as hard, Marcus said. No sleep, no breaks. We finish this. The most intense 4 weeks in human history followed. The defensive network was completed with days to spare. Energy from every available source channeled through global conduits. Ancient weapons integrated with human military forces. Marcus trained relentlessly with the Keepers, learning to channel the Threshold's power, to strike across dimensions, to shield populations. He also addressed the world one final time. People of Earth, he said, his eyes glowing faintly. In ours, we face something that has destroyed countless civilizations. We didn't ask for this fight. But here we are. I'm just one man, chosen because I stopped to help someone in need. That capacity for compassion, that's in all of you. That's humanity's greatest strength. When the Devourer comes, it won't just face alien technology. It will face 7 billion humans who've decided extinction is not an option. It will face a species that, when pushed to the edge, doesn't jump, it pushes back. Marcus smiled, a warrior's smile. The Devourer thinks we're prey. Let's show it that humanity is nobody's prey. The Devourer arrived exactly when predicted, a vast shifting mass of darkness and hunger at the edge of the solar system. It consumed Mars in minutes, then turned toward Earth. All thresholds, Marcus commanded. Power to maximum. Activate primary shields. 6 points of brilliant light erupted across Earth. Energy barriers formed between the planet and the approaching darkness. The entity hit the first barrier and, for the first time in its existence, was stopped. Then it began feeding on the barrier itself. It's adapting, Thane warned. We need to change tactics. Marcus accessed ancient weapons systems. Energy lances struck the Devourer across multiple dimensions. The entity recoiled, damaged. We're hurting it. Concentrate fire. The battle raged for hours. The Devourer consumed 2 shield layers but couldn't break through the rest. Earth's weapons carved pieces from it, diminishing it. But it was learning. Adapting. Marcus, Thane said urgently. The Devourer is opening a portal directly into the atmosphere. It will bypass our shields. Can we stop it? Only if you channel all 6 thresholds simultaneously. But the power surge may kill you. Marcus looked around at people fighting to save their world. He thought of his friends who'd died in Helmand province. Of a wounded dog crawling through desert to find help. Do it, Marcus said. Route all power through me. Marcus, Commander Harmon protested. That's an order. The keepers exchanged glances, then complied. Power from all 6 thresholds poured into Marcus. The pain was overwhelming. Energy enough to power a civilization, to move mountains, to tear reality itself, poured through his body. Every cell screamed. Through the agony, Marcus saw the Devourer's portal forming above Los Angeles. He gathered all the power, shaped it with his will, and struck. A beam of pure energy shot from Threshold Prime and carved through the Devourer across multiple dimensions. The Devourer screamed, a sound of rage, pain, and fear. Again. Marcus shouted through gritted teeth, blood running from his nose. While it's vulnerable. Another surge. Another strike. And another. The Devourer retreated, trying to escape. But Marcus wouldn't let it. He'd seen what this thing had done to countless civilizations. No more. With a final desperate effort, Marcus channeled every remaining bit of power into one last attack. A nova of energy erupted from Earth, expanding across dimensions, consuming the Devourer the way it had consumed so many others. When the light faded, the Devourer was gone, not dead, but scattered across so many dimensions it would take millennia to reform, if ever. Earth had won. Marcus collapsed, darkness claiming him. When Marcus woke 3 days later in a hospital bed, Commander Harmon and Keeper Thane were there. The Devourer? Marcus croaked. Gone, Thane confirmed. Scattered beyond recovery. And Earth is ready if it ever returns. Casualties? 40,000, Harmon said quietly. Mostly from dimensional fluctuations. It should have been extinction. Instead, it was a miracle. What happens now? Now you become the first official guardian of Earth, Harmon smiled. The UN has already drafted the position. There's more, Thane added. Other species detected what you did here. Earth's victory broadcast across dimensions. They'll be coming, Marcus understood. Yes. Some as friends. others as opportunists, and some as conquerors, seeing Earth as weak prey that got lucky. "Let them come," Marcus said with unexpected strength. "We'll face them the same way we faced the Devourer. Together." Over the following weeks, Earth transformed. The Threshold Network became the foundation for a unified planetary defense force, the Unity Coalition. Scientists studied Viridian technology for medical, energy, and humanitarian applications. Marcus found himself both symbol and guardian, but also just a man. He accepted a job counseling veterans at the VA, finding purpose in helping others. 6 months after the battle, Marcus stood in Threshold Prime with Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a brilliant astrophysicist he'd been dating, watching Earth from the holographic display. "Think we're ready for what comes next?" Elena asked, taking his hand. Marcus thought about the wounded dog that hadn't been a dog. About stopping when he could have kept walking. About choosing compassion over indifference. "I don't know," he admitted. "But we'll face it together. That's what matters." Thane approached, colors cycling through peaceful blues. "A ship has entered the solar system. They're hailing us." "Friendly signatures. Other survivors?" Marcus asked. "Yes. The first of many. Earth is no longer alone in the universe, Marcus Webb. Because of you, because of humanity's choice to stand together, you've become a beacon of hope for species across the galaxy." Marcus smiled, squeezing Elena's hand. "Then let's welcome them home. After all, that's what Earth does best, it gives second chances." He thought of his own second chance, found in the middle of the Arizona desert with a wounded dog and an impossible choice. Sometimes the universe asked for help in unexpected ways. And sometimes, all you had to do was stop and answer.